I do want to thank you all for joining us today for our Martin Luther King Day event, Building Community with Justice of the Pies, a conversation with chef, author, and owner of Justice of the Pies, Maya-Camille Broussard. At United Way, we're committed to building a stronger, more equitable Chicago region through our place-based approach, our neighborhood network initiative, and our commitment to helping our neighbors meet their immediate basic needs. We believe that Dr. King's vision was a world of equity, a world where everyone had equal opportunity to thrive, personally, professionally, and economically. Some of the greatest barriers to achieving that vision are in wealth and business creation. If we can create an environment that supports ideas and businesses like those created by today's speaker, we will take a bold step towards achieving the world that Dr. King envisioned. We believe Dr. King would have been excited about Chef Maya-Camille Broussard and all she has accomplished, as well as her ethic of service and giving back, which is why we're so honored to be in conversation with her today. Today's event is generously sponsored by the Lamar Johnson Collaborative, Clayco, and CRG. Thank you. It is also a part of United Way's Equity in Action initiative, which is supported by founding sponsor Winston & Strawn LLP. Thank you. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator of today's conversation, Tamaya RL, United Way's Chief People and Equity Officer. With over 20 years of experience in human resources, Tamaya now provides critical leadership by developing and leading organizational-wide HR strategic initiatives. And as the senior leader for all equity initiatives, she ensures that equity consideration informs planning and decision-making processes across the organization. Tamaya is also proudly born and raised on Chicago's South Side. Once again, thank you for spending your morning with us. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. We are so glad you joined us today. As Lisa mentioned, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a day to reflect on the work yet to be done, but we can also hope it can be a day to pause and celebrate servant leaders, especially those who embody the vision of Martin Luther King Jr. Today, we're celebrating our very special guest, who I have the pleasure of introducing. Maya-Camille Broussard is a chef and owner of Justice of the Pies, a bakery that specializes in sweet and savory pies, quiches, and tarts. Located on the south side of Chicago, Justice of the Pies is a social mission-based bakery that focuses on combating food insecurities. Maya-Camille is also one of the stars on Netflix Bake Squad and has received recognition as a finalist for the 2022 James Beard Foundation Restaurant and Chef Awards, and also the 2023 Jean Banchet Awards for Culinary Excellence. And to top that off, she also recently released a cookbook, Justice of the Pies, sweet and savory pies, quiches, and tarts, plus inspirational stories from exceptional people. We are honored to have Maya-Camille here in conversation with us today. Maya-Camille, welcome. Before we get started, we'd like to remind our audience that we have reserved some time for questions at the end of our time together. As you're listening, please feel free to send us your questions by using the Q&A function, which will appear as an icon at the bottom of your Zoom. We'd love it if you could also add your name and where you're joining us from when you submit your question. Now let's get started. Maya-Camille, let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us more about the story of founding Justice of the Pies? What made you decide to take this on? And what was the inspiration for the name?
Yes, I created the bakery in memory of my late father, Steve Broussard. My dad was a criminal defense attorney, and his hobby was baking pies. And when he passed away in 2009, his niece, my cousin Stephanie, actually came to me and said, you know what we should do to honor Uncle Steve? We should like bake pies and start a foundation. At the moment, I was a week away from opening up my first entrepreneurial endeavor, which was an art gallery with a bar. And the last thing that was on my mind was anything to do with pies. um, but about 3.5 years later, I ended up unfortunately closing the gallery due to a flood that destroyed nearly everything in the gallery. And while I was mourning the loss of that business, I went to go visit my cousins, who are my dad's nephews, in San Francisco. And my cousin's wife took me to a bakery called Mission Pie. Unfortunately, it's no longer there. And we went to the bakery on a school day, on a Wednesday. It's the middle of the day. And I walk in and I see that there are a lot of teenagers working in the bakery. And I'm a bit confused because I'm like, shouldn't they be in school? And my cousin explained to me, she said, oh, this bakery hires teenagers who are displaced from their homes. And most of the teenagers who are displaced is because they decided to be a part or live in their truth as a part of the LGBTQ community. And so that's when it clicked for me, like, wait, I'm supposed to be doing something like this. Not necessarily the same mission, but I knew that I was supposed to be working in the hospitality culinary industry, and I was supposed to be using the platform in a meaningful and purposeful way, and to make a positive impact. So after we left the bakery, I literally went back to my cousin's house and I said I had an aha moment. I had a tingling feeling as soon as I walked into the bakery. We're supposed to bake pies. Remember, Stephanie said something about the funeral at the funeral about starting a foundation. I think I'm going to open up a bakery. I was in San Francisco for 2 weeks before I got on the plane and headed back to Chicago. I had the name of the bakery. I had a working menu. I did not have a business license. I did not know where I was going to sell the pies. I did not know where I was going to make the pies. But I slowly and surely started the business with a Kickstarter campaign in which I raised $7,000. I found a slot at Kitchen Chicago, which is, or I don't even know if it still exists, but it's a shared kitchen space in the Westtown neighborhood of Chicago. And I started applying for farmers markets. And so I began Justice of the Pies in 2014 as a satellite bakery with the mission to positively impact the lives of others. And I wasn't sure at first how I was going to do that, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Wow, that is so inspirational. When COVID-19 struck, lots of us had to adapt and businesses had to adapt. And I understand Justice of the Pies adapted too. Can you talk about what that looked like?
1 second, please.
Sure.
I know that someone is writing the questions in the chat. I would prefer to just use the CC if possible, and the chat reiteration in the chat overlaps with the CC. So if you don't mind repeating that question, that'd be great.
When the COVID-19 pandemic struck, lots of us had to adapt, and businesses also had to adapt. And I understand that Justice of the Pies adapted too. What did that look like?
So I'm a Capricorn, and Capricorns, we are not allergic to hard work. And when the pandemic hit, of course, everybody is shut in. But what happens is I find myself becoming most sad when I am idle. And I felt so idle, and I felt like, okay, I know I'm burnt out and I've had a break, but I've had 2 weeks. That's good enough of a break. What can I do? I just feel like I'm just sitting on my hands here. And one of the incidences that happened was, well, first, my mom was a doctor working for Cook County hospitals. And my next door neighbor is an OB-GYN working for Roseland Hospital, which is on 111th Street, and it's in a very poor neighborhood, so to speak. And I'm worried about my mom, walking into the hospital every day with the pandemic happening, but also I'm hearing the concerns of my next door neighbor. And I learned that one day that doctors and nurses were exasperated. They were overworked. And one doctor was crying because a cafeteria worker at Roseland Hospital got COVID. And so they had to shut down the entire cafeteria. But if you are familiar with 111th Street, you can't just simply walk outside of the hospital and walk to, someplace to get something to eat. It's an area that is suffering from food apartheid, and their morale was dropping. And so I said, oh, wait, I could do something about that. What if I reach out to my social media following and I ask them to purchase a meal, and then I can go to my kitchen space and make the meal and deliver it. I saw myself being useful in a time where everyone was throwing up their hands in the air, wondering, well, we don't know what to do. We don't know how long we're going to be shut in. We don't know how long this lockdown is going to be. We couldn't quite identify the severity of what we were living in that moment. But the one thing that I knew that I could do was alleviate any stress around having a decent hot lunch. And so after I did that on my own, I was reached out, a volunteer of Frontline Foods reached out to me. And Frontline Foods was an initiative that quickly got put together. It was a nonprofit, and they had several chapters in all across the country. And she was the only one that was handling Chicago by herself. And basically, they would raise money and then like thousands of dollars through World Central Kitchen, which is Chef Jose Andres' initiative. And they would pay small restaurant owners, small business owners in the hospitality industry to make meals for frontline workers. So it's a win-win. Hospital workers got their meals, and then smaller mom and pop restaurants were able to hopefully stay afloat because someone was purchasing those meals. So I participated in that, but more than that, I also tried to help her raise money so that I'm not just waiting for someone to assign me a hospital, and purchase these meals, but rather I was trying my best to be active in sourcing who had the means and the ability to donate corporate dollars, so that, we can keep this effort going as long as possible. And I think we were able to do that for about maybe 6 months. But in those 6 months, because of that hustle and that bustle, I felt like I was essentially able to save my business. And that's really hard when you're a satellite bakery. And I think that's very important to point out is I didn't have a brick and mortar. I was a satellite bakery. And while I did not have the overhead and the liability that people who had a brick and mortar had, I still had a business that I needed to keep alive. And sometimes what happens is whenever you have a worldwide challenging event, there are people who are able to actually thrive and grow from that. And then there are some people who unfortunately lose their business from that. I think Madam C.J. Walker started her business in the middle of the Depression. Or it had to be before that. No, I'm sorry. It was the Spanish flu. She started her business in the midst of the Spanish flu. And so here you have someone making pomade, hair pomade, and during a time where people were dying left and right due to the Spanish flu, but she was able to use the moment to corral people to come together and support her business because they were in a time of crisis. So during a time of crisis, people tend to be more empathetic towards small business owners and supportive.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You know, Maya-Camille, part of your ethos in creating Justice of the Pies was the idea of giving back, of service, which is why we wanted to talk to you today on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. How does Justice of the Pies give back to community?
So one thing that really interests me when I am looking at businesses that I like to study for case studies when I am considering my own businesses are those businesses that are using that platform to positively impact the lives of others. Because when you can have a product, but when you have a story behind that product, people are more likely to are interested in supporting that product. For example, you have Tom's shoes. Tom's shoes is not the most comfortable shoe, but people love supporting it because they know that with every pair that they buy, a pair is sent to a person in need in a underdeveloping country. You have Starbucks. Some people say Starbucks doesn't make the best coffee, but it has a cult-like following because people know that Starbucks treat their employees well. They know that they really support people who are attending college and will even contribute to the college education. They know that Starbucks was at the forefront of one of the first companies that was at the forefront of being a fast food company that provided the best health benefits for their employees, and the treatment and support of veterans is also very important to Starbucks. So people know that about Starbucks. That's a part of Starbucks narrative and brand story. And so I had to decide, well, what's my narrative? What's my brand story? When I first started the business and people knew that I created the business in memory of my dad, who was a criminal defense attorney, immediately people said, oh, so does this mean that you're going to hire returning citizens? And, it wasn't to say that I wasn't open to that, but I didn't want that to be my brand story. And also, I didn't want to be boxed in terms of what my giving back looks like. The best way to create a brand story is to tie in your own personal story. And for me, my own personal story that I had a lot of experience with was generational trauma through food issues and food insecurities. My father grew up in the projects on Chicago's West Side, and his father was an alcoholic. He deprived his family of groceries because he spent all of his money on liquor. So my dad would lament his childhood, having grown up hungry. And even though he went to Northwestern undergrad and went to Northwestern law school, was able to get a scholarship, the mentality remained, that project mentality remained of, I need to eat as much food as possible because I don't know I don't know when I'm going to be able to eat again, or I don't know when I'm going to have this money to eat again. And just because he ate a lot doesn't mean that it was good quality food. We had ramen noodle soup in the package. We had hamburger helper. I had cheeses, crackers, and I had Jello. Those four and mashed potatoes in a box. Those 5 items were the staple in our cupboard because it was quick, it was easy, but it wasn't healthy. And because my dad also had this fear, he approached food from a place of fear, and that fear was, I have it today, but does that mean I'm going to have it tomorrow? And because of that fear, he inhaled everything around him, including my food. So I grew up with the idea that I was tired of eating non-healthy food. I didn't want it. Like, I cannot stand the taste of mashed potatoes that have come out the box. But I also had that fear of, is somebody going to take my food? So when I had roommates and I had leftovers, and if somebody ate it, I just went into a rage because it's like that was my food, and that rage stemmed from uh, the trauma that I experienced and that was passed down to me because of my dad's fear of food. And this fear of food is really, systemic in nature, and it affects children who are a part of certain neighborhoods that are affected by food apartheid. And I want to take a moment to explain the difference between food deserts and food apartheid. A desert, like a rainforest, is a natural environment. But apartheid, saying the word apartheid, recognizes that the neighborhood is not like this, but it was made like this because of a lack of private investments into those neighborhoods so that people can have access to healthy food and food choices. And in order to have access, it has to be close enough that someone can walk to or have a short bus ride to. If they need to travel over an hour to get to a grocery store by public transportation, then that neighborhood that they live in is considered to be one that is affected by food apartheid. Um, and because I have a personal story and a personal understanding of the generational trauma of food insecurities, I decided to make that one of the ways in which I can make an impact in the community. And so in 2017, I created the I Need Love workshop, like kneading dough. And the whole purpose of the workshop is to teach children to become self-sufficient in the kitchen. And the kids are in grades 5th through 8th. So people ask me why are you not raising money for world hunger? Well, because I feel like this is where I am most effective, and I'm most effective in this area because when I was in the 4th grade, my dad had to go to court, and this is before cell phones. My dad had a beeper, and we had an answer machine, but if he couldn't get to a payphone, he may not call me. And so he went to court and he told me, I think he said, I'll be back by 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock rolls around, 5 o'clock rolls around, 6 o'clock rolls around, and my dad still isn't home. And I'm hungry. And I open up the fridge and there's nothing in the fridge, absolutely nothing but condiments. And then I open up the freezer and there is a bag of frozen chicken breast. And I open the fridge again and I see that there's an unopened jar of olives, brand new jar of olives, and I like olives. So I ate the entire jar. And when my dad came home, he came home maybe around 7 or 8. And typically what happened is my dad would go to court, but maybe after court, he had to go to the jail house. And so, and he had a poor concept of time. I had to lie to him to say, I need to be somewhere at 5 o'clock, when really I needed to be there at 7:30 just to make sure I could get her on time. So he comes home and he finds me in the living room, completely broken out in a rash on my face and my arms. And he said, what happened to you? And I started crying. I said, it's your fault because you didn't get here. You were not here to fix me anything to eat. And he said, well, what did you eat? I said, I ate the olives. He's like, the whole jar? I said, yes, because that's all that there was. Now, the important thing to note is that there was a bag of chicken breast, frozen chicken breast, in the freezer. If I had the skill set and the wherewithal, I would have thawed out that chicken and it would not have had much seasoning or flavor, but I would have grilled it or baked it or what have you. But I was not self-sufficient in the kitchen as a 4th grader. And so the way that I feel like I'm able to make an impact by taking the knowledge that I have and my skills as an educator to teach children to be self-sufficient in the kitchen so that if they ever find themselves in a situation where their mother is working their second job and can't get home to feed, the oldest kid and the sibling, then maybe that sibling or that child is able to sort of MacGyver a meal together, and make something happen. But definitely don't want that child eating an entire jar of olives and breaking out in a sodium-induced rash.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Maya, you bake as a hobby, but you choose to also bake as your career. Many of us bake as our hobby. I don't, but you chose it as your career. What is it about this work that you love?
So as I know that my official title is a chef, but moreover, I am a creative. And throughout my life and my educational history, everything that I've done has been in a creative field. I went to Howard University in Northwestern, received my degrees in theater. After that, I I worked for Concord Square Theater Company. I was a dance teacher at Alvin Ailey Camp. I played the upright bass for 5 years. I touch every aspect of the creative arts, be it music, dance, theater, playwriting, um, and visual art. I was a member of the National Art Honor Society in high school. And so one thing that I recognized was that in each art form that I studied over the years, if I ceased to practice that art form, I was still going to live.
Mhm.
But the culinary arts is the one art form in which we have to practice in order to live. Because if we don't eat, then we won't live. And one thing that I love about the work that I do is an opportunity to exercise my creativity.
Mhm.
And so that is also what I include in my workshops with the kids, is teach them how they could take a challenging element of everyday life and use it to create a really cool recipe. And when you work in hospitality, whether it's or retail, but especially when you work with food, it becomes very task driven, and you start to just work in a robotic manner. um, it's a lot of prep work. Okay, we're gonna chop a box of onions and dice the box of carrots, and it just becomes very task driven. But as a executive chef and as the head baker, I try to take a moment to really explore, well, what's happening this season? What fruits are seasonal? What holidays are coming up? How can I use that to creatively change the menu? Because that is where many of us who work with food find joy.
Yeah, yeah. Maya, you identify as a person with disabilities. As a member of the deaf and hard of hearing community, today we have an ASL interpreter on screen because we at United Way are continually working to be a more inclusive and equitable organization. Could you talk to us about what it means for you to be a public figure, an acclaimed baker, and a renowned author, and also a person with disabilities?
Thank you for that. So, um, admittedly, I grew up wanting to fit in. I really didn't talk about the fact that I wore hearing aids, and it wasn't something that I was trying to hide. Uh, I mean, I couldn't hide it. You could see the hearing aids, but it is something that I worked to. Honestly, I did work to mainstream myself into society, whether it's taking years and years of speech therapy to the point where people couldn't even tell that I was hard of hearing. The only people who can tell that I'm hard of hearing are speech therapists, because they say that they can hear they can hear it slightly in my voice. Um, but when I joined the cast of Base Squad,
Mhm.
one thing that I was really surprised to see was how many people sent me emails and DMs about uh, how instrumental I was in raising their child's self-esteem, because they saw me on TV. Like, wait a minute, she's deaf and hard of hearing, and she has a hearing aid, and she's a chef on TV. This one mother said that her son wanted a kitchen set after watching Bay Squad. So she went out and bought him a play kitchen set. And he declared right then and there, like, I want to be a chef like Maya-Camille. And that was very humbling, but also eye-opening in terms of my influence on other people living with disabilities. Because, to be honest, when you're a person living with a disability, you're just out here living. You just go about your day and you try to make the adjustments when you're struggling uh, I haven't had hearing aids for the past month, and I won't get a new pair until February. So it's been a struggle for me to hold conversations. I can no longer do FaceTime. I haven't talked to that many people. I don't do meetings as much. I tell everyone like, "Hey, we're gonna have to defer this back, to February when I have ears again." So this is the longest I've gone without hearing aids, and I can't even hear myself. So I'll be out with my friends, and they're like, "You're talking too loud." And then sometimes they'll say, "You're not talking loud enough." So I can't regulate the volume of my own voice. Um, so it's been a very eye-opening and frustrating experience, but it helps me to understand how hard people living with disabilities work to eh, um, to survive in a mainstream neurotypical world. Um, and so when I would receive the emails and the DMs from people exclaiming how impactful I have been to their young daughters or sons, and not just people living with disabilities, but also little Black girls who learn to embrace and love their natural hair because they see me with curly hair on TV. Um, so here I am, a Black woman, a Black person, a woman, and a person living with a disability. So I'm hitting all of these groups that are marginalized that feel as though they see something in me that they also see in themselves, and they see the rise and the accolades and the excellence in which I walk, and they say, "Well, if she can do that, then I can do it too." And so, I never really considered myself to be a disability advocate, but one of my mentors and big sisters is a woman named Claudia Gordon, who is the first Black deaf attorney to graduate from American Law School, and she is also a alum of the Obama administration, in which she was one of the political I don't want to say advisors, but it was a title that was given to a group of people, and each person had to focus on an element, whether it's Muslim, and fighting Islamophobia, or uh, someone who represented the disability community, someone who represented the LGBT community. But she's an alum of the Obama administration. She's absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. And when she saw me on social media talking more and more about being a person living with a disability, she sent me a text and said, "I'm glad that you're finally talking about it." And this is someone that I've known for over 25 years. And she said, "I didn't want to force you to be an advocate, but because you have the notoriety and you have the visibility, people need to see and understand that you too can be atypical and still be excellent, and sometimes be better than the normal people, you know."
Absolutely.
Sometimes,
Absolutely.
and I urge all of you to read Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. And in the book, he talks about how the near misses, the misfits, tend to be the superstars, of society, because they were not supposed to make it, but they were able to take the challenge that they were given and use it to make it work for their benefit. And an example is people living with dyslexia tend to be CEOs
Mm,
because they couldn't read and understand what was written in front of them, but it required them to pivot and to develop amazing memorization skills. So they remember everything. And because of that, they're able to be more effective leaders because of all the information they're able to retain.
absolutely. May I have one more question before we get
Mhm.
to the audience questions? After operating shared kitchens for 8 years, you recently opened up your first storefront last year. So
Can
first
you
of
please
all,
repeat that? Hold on one second.
yep,
Okay,
yep.
please repeat that.
After operating shared kitchens for 8 years, you recently opened up your first storefront last year. So we want to say congratulations. But second, what made you choose to open up the store in the location where you did?
So when I was operating as a satellite bakery, I was on the west side of Chicago. I didn't grow up on the west side of Chicago. I do not live on the west side of Chicago, but that is where the shared kitchens were. And so would travel 45 minutes to an hour and a half in traffic to get there and back every day. And I knew that eventually I wanted to open on the south side of Chicago. And sometimes when I would be at the farmer's market, people would be very combative, like, why aren't you on the south side of Chicago? Like, hey, well, wait a minute, let me work, let me cook. But I am from the south side of Chicago, and I've always wanted to ideally have my first brick and mortar on the south side. The reason why it took me so long to get there is because I remember earlier I talked about the bakery that I had. I mean, not the bakery, the art gallery that I had. And after 3 years, I had to close, unfortunately, due to a flood. We poured in over $60,000 into building out that space to make it compatible for a bar. The plumbing work was really expensive, but I didn't own it. So when we closed the art gallery, I walked away with essentially nothing. And so I knew that ownership was key. And my grandparents, they owned a tavern. Every entrepreneurial endeavor that they took on, it required ownership. They built their house from the ground up. They owned it. They built the tavern from the ground up. They owned it. They collaborated with other Black entrepreneurs on the south side of Chicago to open up motels throughout the city. It was all about ownership, because as Black people, that was the only way that they could see themselves actually making a way and creating a legacy for their family, and to pull themselves out of poverty. And when I lost that art gallery, it nearly broke me, financially and otherwise. And I just knew, okay, I have to build Justice of the Pies with the resources I have right in front of me, which again, I started with $7,000, and I cannot go into a space paying rent, because the profit margins of baked goods are already small. So do I want to like kill my business and paying $7,000 with $10,000 in rent? No. So I looked at a space in South Shore, which used to be the old AP Deli. And I thought that it was perfect because it was already a working kitchen. I just needed to sort of modify it to meet my needs. And the bank would not approve a loan. Talk about redlining. So in the process of waiting to hear back from the bank, the seller backed out. And I was devastated because I had already been approved for a neighborhood opportunity grant from the city of Chicago. So I felt like if I lose the space, then I lose that grant opportunity. My project manager said, wait, let's look. So she immediately got online and started looking for properties that were available on the south side of Chicago. And right before I lost the contract on the AP Deli, I had a dream, and in the dream, my tooth turned black, and it was in the back of my mouth. And I don't remember all of my dreams, but when they're vivid, they're very vivid and lucid. But before my tooth could fall out, I ran to a dentist and got it replaced with a brand new tooth. And I remember looking at the tooth and thinking like, well, this tooth looks better than the teeth that I already got in my mouth. And the teeth I have in my mouth are pretty straight and white. And so when I woke up and I found out that I lost, well, let me explain like the dream. I asked my friend who examines and interprets dreams, like, what does this mean if your tooth turns black or if it falls out? He said, typically when your teeth fall out, that means that somebody in your family is about to pass. And I was like, whoa. He said, well, and then the closer the tooth is to the front of your mouth, the closer that family member is to you. And I said, well, the tooth didn't fall out, it just turned black, and I got it replaced with something that's brand new. He said, okay, well, we'll just have to see what that dream means. So my project manager found a building, and I went to go see it. It's in a neighborhood that is less than 5 minutes from the space where I lost the contract. And I go and see the building. It's perfect because it's on 87th Street. It's on a corner, and it's a busy intersection. and I felt like it was relatively safe. And my mom says it's safer than where I would have been, which is close to South Shore High School. But that Avalon Park area is more safe because you had a lot of homeowners there who've been living there since 1968 in a classic Chicago style bungalow. So I called my mom up and I said, oh, Claudette found another building. And my mom said, well, what's the address so I can look it up? I told her the address and she said, wait a minute, that's my childhood dentist's office.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, so maybe that's what the dream was about. I lose one space, but something better comes along. And this space was the exact same price and double the square footage.
Wow.
And it's one of those situations where, you make plans and then God laughs at your plans. You can't beat yourself up over every loss because perhaps you had to lose that one thing that you thought that you wanted because something better and greater is coming. And so I contacted, the NOF, the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund folks to say, hey, does this address also apply as being in a enterprise zone? And they said yes. So luckily I got to hold on to my NOF grant. I finally told the bank, like, look, stop messing around and making me lose another contract. Are you going to approve me or not? And we got the deal done. And it took a year and a half to build out the space, which is another story. When it should have only taken 6 months, but it took a year and a half. And it's a beautiful space that was designed by a future firm with accessibility in mind. So the space has a lot of elements that focus on how can we make this a space for people using wheelchairs, for people who are visually blind or have loss of vision. So I'm really proud of that work that we've done with making sure the space has accessibility elements, but also I want everyone to understand if they ever come that it's always a work in progress in terms of, because when people know that you've done something, good, they're always going to nitpick and say, well, you did this, but you didn't do that. You made a ramp for a wheelchair, but it doesn't fit a motorized wheelchair. And it's like, yeah, well, we do what we can with what we have. We're doing our best and making sure that it's accessible as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have an audience question, but before I get there, I just want to address the audience really quickly. We know we started a few minutes late, and so we're going to go a little bit past 10 o'clock. For those of you who can stay with us, we welcome you to stay on. But if you need to jump off, we thank you so much for being here. And we're going to continue our conversation with Maya-Camille with just a few more questions. So Maya, I have a question. First question from the audience. It's from Gabriel. Gabriel says, you play a key role healing the fabric needed for MLK's beloved community to thrive. What else do you need help? What else do you need to help communities that who have been long marginalized, especially on the South Side? And what are some challenges you face to sustain and scale up your mission? And I'll repeat it
I'm glad you asked me that. Good question, Gabriel. Okay, so the first thing is, since 2007, I have activated the I Need Love workshop as strictly philanthropic effort on my behalf. Meaning, Justice of Apartheid is L3C, and I didn't really raise money. I would just teach. I didn't have any programming costs. I would tell companies, and people what I was doing and hope for in-kind donation. But I realized that operating the workshop in this manner was not sustainable. So in 2020, I created the Broussard Justice Foundation. I created a nonprofit that recently received its 501c3 in April of 2023. And the whole goal is to migrate the work that I've been doing under the Justice of the Pies umbrella and to actually do it under the Broussard Justice Foundation. And so what I do need is money. I need help in raising money, and I need help in encouraging people to donate to the work that we're doing. So right now, I do have one grant that I received that allows me to build out the infrastructure of the nonprofit.
Mhm.
But this is in creating this nonprofit, it allows me to effectively raise money to actually grow the programming efforts that I've been doing since 2017. So that's number one.
Mhm.
Number two is, I need regulars at the bakery. What happens is people who don't live in an Avalon neighborhood, or don't live on the south side of Chicago, they travel to my bakery, but it becomes a destination location. They may come once a quarter. And the people in Avalon neighborhood may feel as if they can't afford it, even though I have something in the lower end and I have more higher end items. And that's because I use extremely good quality products, and I I am basically someone came in and they say, oh, these are north side prices, and I say I have north side costs still. My food still costs the same regardless of the fact that I'm in Avalon. And so my sales are not what they could be. If I were even in Hyde Park, I would make a killing. If I were in the South Loop, I would make a killing. A killing. I'm not making that killing right now. There are days where people just don't come in. Um, and uh, so that is something that we are struggling with. I've had a lot of really good press, and so I've done as much press outreach that I can do and afford, of course, because that's not free to pay for a publicist. But I, you know, it's a struggle sometimes when you've built this beautiful bakery and people are really excited about it, but the people who have the means to support me are traveling from across the river, from the other side. And so it's just really hard to create um, a consistent flow of regulars. I don't have a line out the door, but Levain Cookies might have a line out the door. Other places that are in the West Loop, where it's become sort of a chef's playground, they'll have a line out the door, um, and I simply don't. So I want to get to a place where people feel comfortable coming to the South Side of Chicago and
Mhm.
know that they can stand outside and wait for, I'm not saying that you'll be waiting, but I
Yeah.
want that that line out the door every time I open because our products are just that good. We really put in, I mean, I put my back, my foot, my elbow, and everything into what we're making. Every cookie that you get is warm. The cinnamon rolls are warm. We have a warmer. We keep everything warm because we know that feeling. We know that what that experience feels like. And so it's all about asking our supporters to continue to spread the word. Don't keep us a secret. Don't keep us to ourselves, to yourselves.
So that actually leads us into our final question from Lamar Johnson of the Lamar Johnson Collaborative, one of our sponsors of this event. Lamar says, you mentioned that you enjoy creating innovative desserts that relate to holidays or events. What is one of those creations that you are most proud of?
There's not something that I would say that I'm most proud of. You know what? I'll tell you what. So I've been invited to Family Reunion. Family Reunion or The Family Reunion is a culinary event that is produced by Food and Wine Magazine, Chef Kwame Onwachi, and Sheila Johnson, who is the co-founder of BET and the first Black woman billionaire. And it takes place on Sheila Johnson's resort called Salamander Resorts, and it's every August. And this is, if you're a Black chef, this is the place to go and to be seen and to eat everything you could eat. Carla Hall is there, Mashama Bailey, Rodney Scott, like all of who's who in the Black culinary world are there. And so the first time I went, I was like, oh, I have to show out because I have to show my peers that I belong here. And when you are creative and when you are a chef, you always are working to remain relevant, to show people that you're relevant. And so that's why it's important to be innovative in the kitchen because you have to prove your relevancy in the food world. So already had a pie that I have been making since 2017 called the strawberry basil key lime pie.
Mm.
And I also had a pie that I created for my cookbook called the lemon espresso pie. So I had two pies in my arsenal, and I decided, okay, when you go to a Black family reunion, what music is always who's always uh the group that you're going to be listening to, whether it's Frankie Beverly and Mays or Chaka Khan, but I thought Earth, Wind, and Fire. So I decided to create a dish that I call Earth, Wind, and Fire. And Earth was going to be the lemon espresso because the lemon espresso pie, the lemon uh, represents the sun that nourishes the earth, and then the coffee grounds in the crust represents sort of like an earthiness.
Mhm.
And wind was strawberry basil key lime pie because the basil and the strawberries both grow in the open field, so in the open air, in the wind. So I had to come up with fire. And so I was like, what can I do that's spicy, but it still has a citrus element because I had lime and lemon in the first two pies. And so for fire, I decided to do yuzu as a citrus, but to steep the yuzu in jalapenos and strain it out. I mixed that in with the curd, and I topped it with mango and cucumbers that had chili lime seasonings and chili threads. So that is one of like my, and it's so pretty when you have all three slices lined up. But Kwame's mom, Chef Kwame's mom, came up to me after I presented the dessert, and she said, "Girl, you are an overachiever." Uh, but that felt good, you know. So that is one of the dishes that I am most proud of.
Thank you. Maya-Camille, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. We are so grateful to you for spending your morning with us. We believe you are a perfect embodiment of MLK's vision of equity as well as a servant leader. And we're so glad to celebrate you and your success today. For all of our viewers here, if you would like to keep up with Maya-Camille, we encourage you to follow her on social media, to stop by Justice of the Pies in Avalon Park. Pick up your copy of her cookbook, Justice of the Pies, Sweet and Savory Pies, Quiches and Tarts, and Inspirational Stories from Exceptional People. And if you would like to stay connected with United Way, we have a number of ways for you to get involved. First, we're currently accepting applicants for our spring 2024 cohort of the Board Leadership Institute. This is United Way's premier training program to equip professionals to serve on nonprofit boards. And if you'd like to learn more, we encourage you to visit our website. Coming up next month will be our Young Leaders United Affinity Group. February 20th, we'll host a happy hour style fundraiser called our Be United Bash. And then on March 13th, our Women United Affinity Group will host their signature breakfast event, Purposeful Transitions. And finally, we also have an upcoming Neighborhood Exchange, which is our free conversation series focused on our neighborhoods, both the challenges they face and the exciting work we're doing in response. On March 20th, we'll be talking about the migrant crisis in Chicago. We'd also like to offer one more huge thank you to our event sponsors, the Lamar Johnson Collaborative, Clayco, and CRG, and to our Equity and Action sponsor, Winston & Strawn. We hope you feel inspired after our conversation this morning. Thank you again for joining us. Stay warm and take care.